Hello everyone, thank you for clicking on this video. Dim the lights that surround you, quiet the persistent noise of the modern age. We are about to take an inner journey, descending not just into the past, but deep into an existence where shadows hold sway and the familiar comforts of your world dissolve like mist. For these next moments, let go of the name you carry, the air you breathe, the very identity that defines you now. We will borrow another existence, inhabit a life etched not in grand histories, but in the quiet, persistent hum of arcane pursuits, a story of silent observation and the weight of secrets. This age we enter is one where the known world meets the edge of the unknowable, and hope, if it is to be found, glimmers like a volatile spark in a darkened chamber. Close your eyes, let the sounds of this present world fade into nothingness, replaced by the faint, persistent hiss of an unseen flame, and the sharp, metallic tang that clings to the back of your throat, a taste of secrets and forbidden arts. Tonight, we cast off the comforts of your time, the ease of your existence. You are no longer who you believe yourself to be. Forget the name that defines you, the warmth of a familiar hearth, the solace of companionship. For these fleeting moments, you are an apprentice, a young soul bound by circumstance and an unspoken dread to a master whose craft is a whispered legend, a perilous path walked in shadows. Your world has shrunk to the confines of ancient stone, your life measured in the careful tending of fires, and the silent observation of mysteries too profound for your tender years. You stir from a sleep that offers little rest, the cold of the flagstone floor, a stark reality against your thinly clad limbs. Your bed is a meagre pile of straw in a shadowed alcove, a space grudgingly conceded in this vast vaulted chamber that serves as your master's laboratory and your prison. Dawn does not penetrate here with any cheer. It is merely a subtle dilution of the oppressive darkness, a grey wash that filters through a single narrow slit of a window, set high in the soot-blackened wall, too high to offer any glimpse of the world beyond. It reveals only the ghostly silhouettes of bizarre apparatus, the tangled skeins of glass tubing, the swollen bellies of retorts, the silent waiting forms of crucibles and alembics. The air itself is a potent, suffocating brew, thick with the accumulated exhalations of countless arcane processes. It stings your nostrils with the acrid bite of sulfur, the cloying sweetness of distilled herbs you cannot name, the sharp tang of volatile acids, and underlying it all, the pervasive scent of ancient dust, and something else, something uniquely metallic and unsettling, like the smell of a freshly struck flint, mixed with old shed blood. This is the atmosphere you inhabit, the air that fills your lungs with every ragged breath. Your body, young as it is, moves with a weary stiffness. Each muscle protests as you rise, your joints aching with a dull, familiar throb. There is no warmth to greet you, save for the distant, unnatural glows emanating from the various furnaces that are the true demanding heart of this sanctum. These are your first charge. Before the thought of breaking your fast, a dry crust of bread perhaps, if the master has remembered to leave one, you must attend to their insatiable needs. Barefoot, you pad across the uneven stones, the chill, a constant reminder of your lowly place. The laboratory is a chaotic landscape of benches laden with strange instruments, shelves groaning under the weight of earthenware jars sealed with wax and marked with cryptic symbols, and carboys filled with liquids of disturbing unnatural hues. You navigate this labyrinth with a practiced caution, for a single misstep, a moment of clumsiness, could invite a disaster far worse than the master's silent, chilling disapproval. The silence here is a living entity. It is not empty, but pregnant with the subtle symphony of ongoing transmutations, the soft, almost inaudible sigh of a bellows you worked late into the night, the faint plink-plink of a precious liquid condensing drop by drop into a waiting phial, the occasional rustle from within the shadowed rafters, where unseen creatures make their nests, and beneath it all, the deep, resonant hum that seems to emanate from the very foundations of the tower, a vibration you feel in your teeth, a constant reminder of the immense, contained energies at play. You approach the smallest of the furnaces, built into a niche in the wall, as if it were a forgotten altar. Its iron door, intricately patterned with figures that writhe and intertwine, is cold to your touch. Inside, the embers from your meticulous care last night still glow, a bed of pulsing, deep crimson. With hands that have learned a precision beyond your years, you feed it small, carefully measured pieces of a dense, black charcoal, a substance you prepare yourself through a long and arduous process of charring specific woods under a new moon, or so the master's fragmented instructions implied. The flame here must be gentle, a breath of heat that coaxes rather than commands, for above it sit delicate glass vessels containing infusions that would boil away to nothingness or explode into noxious fumes at the slightest excess of temperature. Then to the great furnace, the Athanor, though you dare not call it by that sacred name. It is a monstrous edifice of dark, heat-stained brick, bound with bands of verdigrised copper, its maw large enough to swallow a small sheep. This beast demands heavy logs of ancient oak, seasoned for decades, which you must haul from the storeroom with straining muscles. The wave of heat that erupts when you unlatch its heavy door is a physical assault, searing your skin, making the air shimmer and dance. Here the fire must be a contained inferno, a raging white-hot core, capable of melting the most stubborn metals, of forcing substances into unions they would otherwise resist with all their elemental fury. You shield your face as best you can, your movements swift and economical, born of painful experience. The Master. He is an absence that is more potent than any presence. You have not seen him emerge from his inner sanctum, a heavy oaken door at the far end of the laboratory, a door you have never passed since the previous night. Yet his will is everywhere, in the chalked circles and triangles on the floor around certain experiments, in the precise alignment of jars on a shelf, in the very way the dust seems to settle, or not settle, on particular objects. You feel his gaze even when he is unseen, a prickling on your skin, a weight in the air that compels obedience. Once the fires are fed, and their strange lights, one a soft blue, another a furious orange-white, cast their unholy illumination upon the crowded chamber, you turn to the grinding slab. Today, it is a heap of dull, grey stones, veined with faint, rust-coloured streaks. Your task is to reduce them to the finest powder imaginable. The pestle, a massive cylinder of polished granite, is almost too heavy for you to wield effectively for long, but you begin the crushing, rhythmic work. Thud, scrape, thud, scrape. The sound echoes in the vaulted space, a monotonous prayer to an unknown god of transformation. A fine, gritty dust fills the air, coating your already grimy tunic, settling in your hair, finding its way into your nostrils and the back of your throat, where it leaves a dry, earthy taste. You do not know what these stones are. You do not know what secrets they hold, or what role their dust will play in the Master's grand, incomprehensible designs. To ask would be an impertinence, a dangerous display of curiosity. Your role is to obey, to prepare, to be the unthinking instrument of his profound and terrifying art. And so you grind, the stones yielding their essence slowly, painfully, under your relentless effort, as the grey, reluctant light of another day in the alchemist's tower begins its slow, indifferent passage across the ancient, unforgiving stones. The dust is a constant companion, a gritty veil that settles upon your eyelashes, lines the creases of your knuckles, and rasps in your throat with every shallow breath. Hours you toil at the grinding slab, the granite pestle a leaden weight in your wearying arms. The initial stubborn resistance of the grey, rust-veined stones has given way to a grudging pulverization. Thud, scrape, thud, scrape. The rhythm is hypnotic, a metronome marking the slow erosion of not just the stones, but also of your own dwindling reserves of energy. Your shoulders scream in protest, your back is a landscape of knotted aches, but you dare not pause for more than a fleeting moment to wipe the sweat and grime from your brow with the back of an equally grimy hand. The light from the high, narrow window shifts almost imperceptibly, crawling across the opposite wall, a slow, pale tide. It illuminates, in its passage, sections of the laboratory usually lost in deeper shadow. A forgotten corner piled high with cracked earthenware retorts, their forms like decapitated birds. A series of tarnished copper plates, etched with diagrams of celestial spheres, intertwined with the bodies of mythical beasts. A single desiccated human skull, perched atop a stack of mouldering leather-bound ledgers, its hollow sockets staring out with an eternal, indifferent wisdom. You try not to look at it for long. It is too potent a reminder of the ultimate end of all alchemical striving, of all human endeavor. Sometimes your mind, seeking escape from the relentless monotony, drifts. You recall, with a pang that is almost physical, the taste of fresh spring water, the scent of rain on sun-baked earth, the distant sound of a shepherd's pipe from the hills of your half-forgotten childhood. These memories are like shards of colored glass, beautiful but sharp, threatening to cut if held too tightly. You push them away. Such thoughts are a weakness, a distraction from the unyielding present, from the immediate reality of stone and dust, and the ever-present, unspoken threat of the master. Finally, after what feels like an age, the last of the stones has been reduced to a fine, almost silken powder. It lies in a surprisingly small, dense mound on the grinding slab, its color now a uniform, dull gray, the rust-colored veins having vanished into the hole. You handle it with the utmost care, your movements slow and deliberate as you sweep every precious particle into a designated stoneware jar. The jar is old, its surface crazed with fine lines, and it bears a single stark symbol painted in what looks like dried blood, a downward-pointing triangle with a horizontal line bisecting its apex. Another of the master's arcane hieroglyphs, its meaning is sealed to you as the heavy wax stopper you now press firmly into the jar's mouth. With the task completed, a wave of exhaustion washes over you, so profound it makes your knees tremble. You carefully place the jar on a specific empty space on a high shelf, a space that was, you are certain, occupied by a different emptier jar only yesterday. The master's silent instructions, his rearrangement of the laboratory's elements, are a constant, subtle dance you must follow. Now perhaps a brief respite. Now perhaps the dry crust of bread that serves as your daily sustenance. You move towards the small, crude table in your sleeping alcove, your limbs heavy, but as you do, a new sound cuts through the usual symphony of the laboratory's quiet industry. It is not the hiss of a furnace, nor the drip of a condenser, nor the scuttling of unseen creatures. It is the faint, unmistakable creak of the heavy oaken door leading to the master's inner sanctum. You freeze, every nerve ending suddenly alight. The bread is forgotten, your weariness evaporates, replaced by a surge of adrenaline that is purely fear. He is stirring, he is coming. The door groans again, louder this time, followed by the soft, almost inaudible shuffle of slippered feet. You turn slowly to face the oaken portal, your heart hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird. Your gaze is fixed on the floor, as always, for to meet his eyes unbidden is an act of unimaginable presumption. The silence in the laboratory becomes absolute, save for the low hum of the athanor and your own ragged breathing. You wait, a statue of apprehensive obedience, for whatever decree, whatever new and terrifying task, the master will bring forth from the shadows of his hidden world. The true work of the day, you sense, is only now about to begin. The oaken door, ancient and scarred, groans open fully, not with a sudden movement, but with a slow, deliberate weight that seems to suck the very air from the laboratory towards it. Framed in the dark aperture, against a backdrop of even deeper, impenetrable shadow from within his sanctum, stands the master. He is a figure of stark lines and consuming darkness. You do not see his face, for it is perpetually lost within the deep hood of his heavy wine-dark robe, a robe that seems to absorb what little light dares to touch it. Only the glint of his eyes, like chips of obsidian reflecting the distant furnace glow, is sometimes visible, and you avoid even that fleeting contact. His hands, when they emerge from the voluminous sleeves, are pale and long-fingered, stained with chemicals you cannot identify, their nails often unnaturally dark. He moves with a silence that belies his tall, somewhat stooped frame, a silence that is more unnerving than any sound. Today, a faint, metallic scent clings to him, sharper and more astringent than the usual laboratory miasma, a scent that speaks of recently handled reagents of great potency. He does not speak. Words for him seemed to be a currency too precious to expend on a mere apprentice. Instead, one of those pale, stained hands lifts, its fingers gesturing with a slow, deliberate precision towards a section of the workbench you cleared earlier. There, beside the newly filled jar of grey powder, he has placed other items while you were engrossed in your grinding. A small, intricately carved ivory box, a delicate silver spoon no larger than your thumb, and a single perfectly transparent crystal phial, stoppered with a dark, polished stone. The instruction is clear, conveyed through this silent language of objects. You are to measure a precise quantity of the powder you so laboriously created, using the silver spoon, and transfer it into the crystal phial. The ivory box, you surmise, likely holds another ingredient, for the phial seems too large for the powder alone. Your heart, which had begun to settle after his initial stirring, now thumps anew with a cold apprehension. This is not a crude task like grinding stones or stoking fires. This requires exactitude, a steadiness of hand you are not sure you possess under his unseen, yet acutely felt, scrutiny. The powder is fine, almost ethereal. A breath too strong could scatter it. The phial is delicate, its crystal thin as a winter frost, and the silver spoon, it is an instrument of such refinement, so unlike the rough tools you usually handle, that its very presence signifies the importance, and perhaps the danger, of this operation. You approach the bench, your bare feet making no sound on the flagstones. You can feel the master's stillness behind you, a silent, unblinking observation that makes the skin on your neck prickle. You reach for the ivory box first, its surface cool and smooth beneath your trembling fingertips. It is heavier than it looks, intricately carved with coiling serpents and strange star-like sigils that seem to shift and writhe if you stare at them too long. With hesitant fingers, you lift the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looks like spun moonlight, a fine silvery white floss, lies a single teardrop-shaped pearl. But it is like no pearl you have ever seen or imagined. It is not white nor cream, but a deep, luminous black, yet it seems to hold all colours within its depths, shifting and swirling as if a tiny galaxy were trapped within its perfect, polished surface. It pulses with a faint, internal light, a cold, distant radiance that seems to draw the warmth from your skin. A faint, almost inaudible hum emanates from it, a vibration that resonates deep within your chest, unsettling and strangely alluring. You stare, mesmerized, forgetting for a moment the master, the laboratory, your own fear. This is beauty of a kind you have never known, a beauty that feels ancient, powerful, and profoundly alien. A soft hiss, like air escaping a constricted space, breaks the spell. It comes from behind you, the master. A reminder. You flinch, your gaze snapping back to the task at hand. The black pearl, the grey powder, the crystal phial. Your instructions are to combine them, or at least, to prepare them for combination. But how? There is no mortar here for grinding the pearl, no solvent to dissolve it. You look again at the arranged objects. The silver spoon. It is not just for measuring the powder. Its tiny, shallow bowl is perfectly shaped to cradle the pearl. A new understanding, cold and sharp, pierces through your fear. You are not to crush it. You are to place it, whole, into the phial, along with a precise measure of the grey powder. This feels like a desecration, to entomb such an unearthly jewel in common dust, within the fragile confines of glass. Yet, the master's silent command is absolute. With fingers that feel clumsy and oversized, you use the silver spoon to gently lift the black pearl from its moonlit bed. It is surprisingly heavy for its size, and the cold it radiates is intense, seeping through the silver of the spoon into your very bones. The faint hum it emits grows stronger, a subtle thrumming that you can feel vibrating up your arm. Holding your breath, you carefully guide the spoon towards the mouth of the crystal phial. The opening is small, your hand trembles. A single mistake, a moment of clumsiness, the pearl could fall, shatter, or unleash. What? You dare not imagine. The master's silence behind you is a goad, a relentless pressure. The pearl slips from the spoon into the phial with a soft, almost inaudible click, settling at the bottom like a drop of captured night. It continues to pulse with its strange internal light, illuminating the clear crystal from within. Now the powder. You take the jar of ground stone, its grey contents so mundane in comparison to the otherworldly pearl. Using the same silver spoon, you carefully measure out a tiny quantity, the master's unspoken instruction conveyed by the size of the spoon itself, allowing for no more than a scant pinch. The fine dust clings to the silver, and you tap it gently, watching as it cascades down, a soft grey rain, to cover the black pearl. The moment the powder touches the pearl, a subtle change occurs. The pearl's light seems to dim slightly, its hum to deepen, to become more resonant. A faint, almost imperceptible wisp of vapour, like a cold breath, rises from the mouth of the phial, carrying a scent you cannot place, ancient, like dust from a forgotten tomb, yet also sharp and vital, like the air before a lightning strike. You quickly insert the crystal stopper, your heart pounding. The task is done. The pearl and the powder are sealed together, a potent, unknown union. You step back from the bench, your knees weak. What have you just handled? What forces have you helped to bring together? The silence stretches, broken only by the distant roar of the great furnace and the low, insistent hum that now seems to emanate not just from the Athanor, but also from the small sealed phial on the bench before you. The master has not moved. He has not spoken, but you feel a change in the atmosphere, a subtle shift in the unseen currents of the laboratory, as if a new potent chord has been struck in the ongoing, silent symphony of his great work. The silence in the laboratory, after you step back from the bench, was no longer just an absence of sound. It felt charged, expectant. The small, sealed crystal phial, containing its improbable union of pearl-like night and stone dust, pulsed with a light that seemed to defy the gloom, its faint hum, a tangible vibration in the heavy air. You did not dare look directly at the master, but you could feel his stillness, the intensity of his unseen gaze, fixed not on you, but on the phial. Slowly, with the same deliberate, almost ritualistic grace he brought to all his movements, the master glided forward. His wine-dark robe whispered over the flagstones, the only sound apart from the distant furnaces and the phial's insistent thrum. He did not acknowledge you. You were, at this moment, less than a shadow, merely a part of the laboratory's fixtures that had fulfilled its immediate function. His pale, stained fingers, emerging from the deep cowl of his sleeve, reached for the phial. He did not snatch it, but lifted it with a reverence that seemed almost tender, were it not for the unsettling predatory gleam that you imagined in his hidden eyes. He held it up, not to the meagre light of the high window, nor to the flickering candlelight, but towards the unholy green glow of the great cauldron, as if seeking an augury in its spectral radiance. The black pearl within the phial seemed to absorb the green light, its own internal luminescence shifting, swirling with new, disturbing colours, flashes of oily purple, veins of angry crimson, depths of absolute, light-devouring black. The hum intensified, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, you thought the delicate crystal would shatter from the contained energy. The master made a soft, guttural sound, almost a sigh, or perhaps a grunt of satisfaction. It was impossible to tell. Then he turned, not towards his inner sanctum, but towards a different, rarely used section of the laboratory, an alcove dominated by a complex apparatus of polished copper, twisted glass tubes, and a series of interconnected crystal spheres, all mounted upon a tripod of dark, carved wood. This was the pelican, a device you knew was used for a specific, continuous type of circulatory distillation, designed to endlessly refine a substance, repeatedly vaporizing and condensing it. You had seen it used perhaps twice before, for preparations of extreme delicacy and importance. He placed the phial containing the pearl and powder into a small padded clamp at the heart of the pelican, directly above a tiny silver spirit lamp. With movements of almost surgical precision, he connected a series of fine glass tubes to the phial's stopper, leading them towards the largest of the crystal spheres. He then turned to you. Again, no words. He simply pointed to the spirit lamp, then to a small hourglass-like timer filled with black sand, and finally to a fresh roll of parchment and a sharpened quill he produced from within his robe. The instruction was, as always, starkly clear. You were to light the spirit lamp, turn the timer, and observe everything. Record any change, no matter how minute, any shift in color, any emission of vapor, any alteration in the hum or pulse of the file's contents. You were to be the eyes of this stage, the silent chronicler of this new potent gestation. Your hand trembled as you lit the spirit lamp. Its flame was small and intensely blue, almost invisible. You placed it carefully beneath the file. The black sand in the timer began its slow, inexorable descent. The master watched you for another long moment, his stillness an oppressive weight. Then, without a sound, he turned and retreated into the shadows of his private chamber, the oaken door closing with a soft final thud. You were alone once more, but the nature of your solitude had changed. Before you were a labourer, a grinder of stones, a tender of fires. Now, you were an observer, a guardian of a mystery. The responsibility felt immense, terrifying. You pulled your low stool closer to the pelican, your gaze fixed on the file. The gentle blue flame of the spirit lamp licked at its underside. For a long time, nothing seemed to happen. The black pearl lay quiescent in its bed of grey powder, its internal light a steady, cold pulse. The laboratory returned to its usual symphony of subtle sounds, the hiss of the larger furnaces, the drip of a distant condenser, the sigh of the wind against the high window. Then you noticed it. A faint mist, like a breath on a cold morning, was beginning to form within the file, just above the surface of the powder. It swirled slowly, catching the light from the pearl, making it diffuse, ethereal. The hum from the file grew a fraction louder, its pitch subtly higher. You dipped your quill into the small pot of ink you kept beside you, your hand shaking slightly as you made your first notation on the fresh parchment. Hora prima, nebula tenuis apparet, sonus crescit, first hour. A thin mist appears, the sound increases. You wrote in the crude Latin the master had taught you, the language of his ancient texts, the language of this hidden art. As the black sand continued its patient fall, the mist within the file thickened, becoming a swirling, opalescent cloud. The colours within the pearl seemed to bleed outwards into this cloud, creating a miniature, contained aurora of shifting, impossible hues. The metallic, ancient scent you had noticed earlier, the one that seemed to emanate from the pearl itself, intensified, pricking at your nostrils with a new, sharper edge. The glass of the file grew warm to the touch, then hot. You recorded every change, your quill scratching across the parchment, a tiny sound in the vast, expectant silence. The task was all-consuming. Your earlier weariness was forgotten, replaced by a strange, heightened alertness, a feeling of being on the precipice of some profound revelation, or some equally profound disaster. The master's cryptic words about the Nigredo, about the crow pecking at its own heart, returned to you. Was this part of that blackening, that dissolution, or was it something else entirely? A new thread in his impossibly complex tapestry. The hum from the file was no longer subtle. It was a clear, resonant tone, almost a musical note, that seemed to fill the alcove, vibrating in your chest, making your teeth ache. The opalescent cloud within now pulsed in time with this hum, and you saw, or perhaps you imagined, tiny sparks of light, like distant stars, igniting and extinguishing within its depths. The air around the pelican grew noticeably warmer, and the strange, complex aroma became almost overpowering, a dizzying blend of unknown spices, heated metals, and something that reminded you, unsettlingly, of the ozone-charged air after a violent thunderstorm. You felt a prickling sensation on your skin, as if the very atmosphere around the apparatus was charged with an unseen energy. This was no mere distillation of herbs. This was something else, something powerful, and you were its sole, terrified guardian. The charged atmosphere around the pelican grew more intense with each passing moment. The air so thick with unseen energies, it felt like wading through water. The prickling on your skin became a constant tingle, and a faint metallic taste, like sucking on an old iron nail, coated your tongue. The strange, complex aroma was now so potent, it made your head spin, a dizzying, almost hallucinogenic perfume that seemed to warp the very edges of your vision. The familiar, grimy details of the laboratory, the cobwebbed rafters, the shadowed shelves, the cold indifference of the stone walls, began to waver, to shimmer as if seen through heated air. Your focus, however, remained locked on the file within the heart of the pelican. The opalescent cloud inside no longer merely swirled, it roiled, a miniature tempest of impossible colours. The tiny sparks of light you had glimpsed earlier now flared with greater intensity, like 1,000 fireflies trapped in a jar, their movements frantic, chaotic. The black pearl at the bottom was almost invisible now, subsumed by the furious, luminous activity above it. The hum had risen in pitch, transforming into a high, keening vibration that resonated deep within your skull, making your teeth ache and your vision blur at the edges. It was a sound that felt both ancient and utterly alien, a song of creation, or perhaps of unmaking. The glass of the file itself, once merely warm, then hot, now glowed with a faint, internal luminescence of its own, as if the energies contained within were threatening to leach out, to consume their fragile prison. You watched, mesmerized and terrified, as a network of impossibly fine, hair-like cracks began to appear on its surface, tiny fissures spreading like a spiderweb, each one catching the internal light and fracturing it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. The master's warning about the moon's tears being handled like one's own soul took on a new, terrifying immediacy. If this vessel, so much more potent, were to shatter, you scribbled frantically on the parchment, your hand moving with a life of its own, driven by a desperate need to document this escalating crisis. Even as a part of you screamed to flee, hora tertia, lumen crescit vehementer, sonus acutus intolerabilis, remi in vitro apparent. Third hour. The light increases violently. The piercing sound is unbearable. Cracks appear in the glass. Your Latin was crude, your script uneven, but the terror was clearly legible in every stroke of the quill. The heat emanating from the pelican was now a palpable wave, pushing against you, making your skin flush and your breath come in short, shallow gasps. The very air around the apparatus seemed to shimmer, to distort, and you could swear you saw tendrils of colourless, heat-driven vapour, like ghostly serpents, writhing upwards from the file, despite its stopper. Then the hum changed. It lost its musical quality, fracturing into a discordant series of grating, high-pitched shrieks, as if the very substance within the file was screaming in agony or ecstasy. The light within pulsed violently, no longer a steady glow but a series of blinding, stroboscopic flashes, white, then blood red, then a terrifying depthless violet. Each flash seared your retinas, leaving dancing spots before your eyes. You recoiled, your stool scraping harshly against the stone floor, the sound swallowed by the cacophony from the file. This was no longer a controlled distillation. This was something else. Something breaking free. The fine cracks on the file's surface were visibly widening, the internal light blazing through them. You looked wildly towards the master's oaken door. Should you call out? Should you break his command and warn him? But what could you say? What words could possibly describe this escalating elemental fury? And what if this, too, was part of his design, this dance on the very edge of catastrophe? Before you could decide, before your fear could coalesce into any coherent action, the shrieking from the file reached an unbearable crescendo, and with a final, blinding flash of pure white light that bleached all colour from the laboratory, it stopped. Silence. A silence so absolute, so profound. It was more terrifying than the preceding chaos. The green flame in the cauldron still burned, the athanor still hummed its low, powerful song. But from the pelican there was nothing, no light, no sound, only the lingering, acrid smell of ozone and something else, something like burnt sugar and despair. You stared, your eyes wide, unblinking, struggling to adjust after the blinding flash. The file within the pelican was still intact, but it was no longer luminous. It was dark, opaque, as if filled with a solidified clot of night. The cracks on its surface were still visible, dark lines against a darker interior. The spirit lamp beneath it had extinguished itself, its blue flame snuffed out by the force of that final silent explosion of light. Slowly, hesitantly, you rose from your stool, your legs trembling so violently you could barely stand. You approached the pelican, step by cautious step, your heart a frantic drum against your ribs. The intense heat had subsided, replaced by a strange, unnatural coldness that emanated from the now darkened file. The prickling sensation on your skin was gone. The air felt empty, drained. You peered closer. The opalescent cloud was gone. The sparks were gone. The black pearl, you could not see it. The contents of the file were now a uniform, dull, matte black, like a fragment of a starless void. It was utterly still, utterly silent. Had it worked? Had the process reached its intended conclusion, or had it failed catastrophically? The precious moon's tears, or whatever more potent essence this was, annihilated in that final silent conflagration. You had no way of knowing. The master's instructions had been to observe and record. They had not included contingencies for this. You looked at the parchment, at your last, frantic scrawl, then back at the inert, silent file. A profound sense of anticlimax, mingled with a lingering, bone-deep terror, washed over you. The laboratory, moments before a stage for elemental fury, was now preternaturally calm, but it was the calmness of a battlefield after the fighting has ceased, a quiet filled with unspoken questions and the shadow of unseen consequences. And the master, in his sanctum, remained silent, leaving you alone with the aftermath of a process you had witnessed but could never hope to understand. The silence from the master's sanctum stretched, becoming a thin, high-pitched hum in your own ears, a counterpoint to the dull, heavy thud of your heart. Minutes bled into what felt like an hour. The inert, black-filled file on the pelican apparatus seemed to radiate a palpable coldness, a void where moments before there had been furious energy. You did not dare touch it. You did not dare move far from it, lest the master emerge and find you neglecting even the aftermath of your vigil. You strained your hearing, listening for any sound from behind the oaken door, a cough, the rustle of parchment, the clink of a vial. There was nothing, only the profound, unbroken stillness that had fallen after the experiment's violent culmination. It was an unnatural silence, more unsettling than his usual reclusive quiet. Before, there was always the sense of his presence, his mind at work. Now, there was only a void. The remnants of the day's light had long since faded from the high, grimy window. The laboratory was solely lit by the green, unwavering flame of the great cauldron, the distant, fierce glow of the main furnace, and the few tallow candles you had placed, their flames now burning low, casting long, skeletal shadows that writhed and danced with every imperceptible draught. The air, still sharp with the ozone-like scent, and the ghost of burnt sugar, felt heavy, expectant. A new fear began to creep into your heart, colder and more insidious than your usual dread of the master's displeasure. What if something had happened to him? That final, silent conflagration of light from the file, had it been too powerful? Had some invisible force, unleashed by the process, reached him even within his sealed chamber? You recalled the tales whispered in the city below, tales of sorcerers consumed by their own magics, of alchemists vanishing in puffs of acrid smoke, their laboratories left as silent, accursed testaments to forbidden knowledge. The master was not a kind man. He was a harsh, demanding taskmaster, his indifference a constant weight on your spirit. Yet, your existence, your very survival, was tethered to him. If he was gone, what would become of you? The thought was a cold stone in your belly. You were a boy, alone, with no skills deemed useful in the sunlit world, your hands stained with substances that would make a common man recoil, your mind filled with the fragmented, disturbing knowledge of this shadowed craft. The silence became unbearable. It pressed in on you, suffocating, filled with unspoken, terrifying possibilities. The master's earlier command, "Do not disturb me further unless the very stones of this tower begin to bleed," warred with a rising, desperate urgency. Perhaps this silence, this utter lack of reaction after such a potent event, was akin to the stones bleeding. Perhaps it was a sign that the very foundation of your precarious world had fractured. You found yourself moving, your feet carrying you across the cold flagstones towards the oaken door, almost without conscious volition. Your earlier fear of his wrath was now overshadowed by this new, more profound dread. Each step was a monumental effort, your breath catching in your throat. You stood before the door, its dark, ancient wood seeming to absorb the flickering light. You listened, pressing your ear against the cold, rough surface. Still nothing, only the deep, internal thrum of the Athanor, a sound that seemed to be the very pulse of the tower itself. Your hand, trembling, rose to the iron latch. It felt colder than usual, or perhaps it was just the chill of your own skin. For a moment you hesitated. This was a transgression. The inner sanctum was forbidden, its secrets guarded with a jealousy that bordered on mania. But the silence, the terrible, absolute silence. With a surge of desperate resolve, you lifted the latch. It moved with a protesting groan, a sound that echoed unnervingly in the vast, still laboratory. You pushed the door inward, slowly, an inch at a time. A wave of air, colder than that of the main laboratory, washed over you, carrying a complex, unfamiliar scent. Not the usual sharp chemical odours, but something ancient, like dust from a long-sealed tomb, mingled with the faint, sweet aroma of dried roses and a lingering trace of that ozone-like sharpness from the pelican experiment. The room within was not entirely dark. A single, tall candelabrum stood on a massive, rune-carved oaken table in the centre, its many candles burning with a clear, steady light, illuminating a scene of both meticulous order and profound, arrested chaos. Books, hundreds of them, leather-bound tomes, some vast and iron-clasped, others slim volumes of an almost papyrus-like thinness, were piled on every surface, stacked on shelves that reached to the vaulted ceiling, even scattered across the floor in precarious towers. Charts depicting constellations unknown to you, anatomical drawings of creatures that surely never walked the earth, and complex, interwoven diagrams of alchemical processes covered every inch of wall space not already obscured by books. And in the centre of it all, slumped in a high-backed, heavily carved wooden chair before the great table, was the master. His head was lolled to one side, his cowl fallen back, revealing, for the first time you had ever seen it, his face. It was ancient, far older than you had imagined, a landscape of deep-etched lines, stretched parchment thin over sharp cheekbones and a prominent brow. His eyes were closed, his lips thin and bloodless, slightly parted. His pale, stained hands rested limply on the arms of the chair. He was utterly still. On the table before him lay an open book, its pages filled with dense, spidery script and intricate, hand-coloured illustrations of a vast, cosmic serpent devouring its own tail, its scales shimmering with all the colours you had seen in the black pearl, in the roiling cloud within the pelican. Scattered around the book were several small obsidian black objects, smooth and cool-looking, like solidified drops of the substance now inert within the phial in the outer laboratory. One of them lay beside his fallen hand, as if he had been holding it. You took a hesitant step into the room, then another, your gaze fixed on the still figure. Was he merely asleep, overcome by exhaustion, after whatever intense process had culminated in the pelican's silent fury? Or was this a deeper, more final stillness? The air in the sanctum thrummed with a silent, residual power, a feeling not unlike the charged atmosphere around the pelican before its climax, but subdued now, like the fading resonance of a great bell after it has been struck. You could almost taste the energy on your tongue, a faint, metallic tang. You approached the chair, your heart a painful knot in your chest. You reached out a trembling hand, hesitating for a long moment before daring to touch the back of his limp, exposed hand. It was cold, not the ordinary coolness of a living body in a chilly room, but a deep, profound coldness, like marble that has lain for centuries in a lightless crypt. The master was gone. Whether his spirit had fled or been consumed, or had merely achieved some final, incomprehensible transmutation, you did not know. He was simply no longer there, a vacant vessel in his chair of secrets. You stood there, a boy alone in the heart of a dead alchemist's forbidden sanctum, surrounded by the accumulated knowledge of lifetimes, the silent testament to a relentless consuming quest. The fires in the outer laboratory still burned, the Athena still hummed its tireless song, but the guiding will, the terrible, awe-inspiring intellect that had driven it all, was extinguished. What now? The question echoed in the sudden vast emptiness of your world. Were you free, or were you simply more lost than ever before? A tiny, insignificant speck adrift in a universe of secrets you had only just begun to glimpse, with no master to guide you, and no path to follow but the one you might, or might not, find in the ashes of his extraordinary, terrifying work. The night was far from over, and for the first time, its shadows felt entirely your own. As the first cold light of a new dawn eventually crept into the alchemist's tower, illuminating the silent disarray of a life dedicated to arcane pursuits, the weight of that question might have spurred a profound shift in perspective. The search for knowledge within sealed rooms and cryptic texts had reached its desolate end. Perhaps true discovery, true understanding, lay not in the manipulation of matter in hidden crucibles, but in the bold exploration of the vast, uncharted physical world. While one man's quest for the philosopher's stone concluded in stillness, a different kind of restless human spirit, in an era not entirely dissimilar, was already pushing outwards, their eyes fixed on distant horizons rather than the heart of a furnace. Indeed, around the turn of the first millennium, while the esoteric arts, like those your late master pursued, were confined to the shadowed studies of a few, a more tangible and expansive form of exploration was being undertaken by the Norse peoples of Scandinavia. These Vikings, driven by a combination of resource needs, overpopulation, and an unyielding spirit of adventure, possessed maritime skills that were unparalleled in their time. Their voyages, etched into history and legend through the Icelandic sagas, primarily the saga of Eric the Red and the saga of the Greenlanders, tell of their westward expansion, culminating in the European discovery of North America nearly 5 centuries before Christopher Columbus. The journey into the western Atlantic was a gradual one, with the Norse establishing settlements first in Iceland, and then, under the leadership of Eric the Red, in Greenland around 985 AD. These outposts served as vital, if remote, stepping stones for expeditions further into the unknown. The pivotal figure in the sagas concerning the discovery of the North American mainland is Leif Erikson, a son of Eric the Red. Around the year 1000 AD, inspired by accounts from an Icelandic trader named Bjarni Herjolfsson, who had sighted unknown lands to the west after being blown off course years earlier, Leif decided to investigate. He purchased Bjarni's ship, gathered a crew of approximately 35 men, and purposefully set sail to find these rumoured shores. The Norse navigated using their sophisticated knowledge of the sun, stars, ocean currents, and bird migration patterns, possibly aided by tools such as the sunstone for determining the sun's position in overcast conditions. Their ships, likely sturdy Nars designed for open ocean travel and cargo, were capable of withstanding the harsh conditions of the North Atlantic, though the voyages were fraught with peril from storms, ice, and the sheer challenge of navigating vast, uncharted waters. According to the sagas, Leif's expedition made several landfalls. The first was a barren land of ice and flat stones, which he named Helluland, likely Baffin Island. Sailing south, they came upon a wooded territory with white beaches, dubbed Markland, probably parts of Labrador, a valuable source of timber. Continuing further south, they reached a region that was particularly inviting, with a milder climate, abundant salmon, and wild grapes, which led Leif to name it Vinland, Jorda Wineland. Here, they established a settlement, Leif's Boothir Leif's Booths, and spent at least one winter. The exact location of Vinland is debated, but the archaeological site at Lanesog Meadows in northern Newfoundland, Canada, discovered in the 1960s by Helgen and Steiningstad, provides definitive proof of a Norse settlement from this period. The remains of turf-walled longhouses, a smithy, and other Norse artifacts found there confirm the saga's accounts. Life in Vinland, however, was not without significant challenges. The Norse settlers encountered the indigenous peoples of the region, whom they called Scrallings. While initial interactions may have involved some trade, the Norse offering items like cloth in exchange for furs, relations quickly soured. Cultural misunderstandings, competition for resources, and the inherent aggressiveness of the Viking explorers likely contributed to conflict. The sagas recount violent clashes. Leif's brother, Thorvald Eriksson, was reportedly killed by an arrow in one such encounter. Thorfinn Karlsefni led a more substantial attempt at colonization, bringing women and livestock, but this too was ultimately abandoned due to persistent hostility from the Scrallings. The Norse, though possessing iron weapons, were vastly outnumbered and operating far from their home base in Greenland, making sustained settlement untenable. Within a few decades, the Norse presence in Vinland ceased. While sporadic voyages from Greenland to Markland for timber may have continued for some time, the dream of a permanent Norse colony in the New World faded. Nevertheless, these voyages represent a remarkable achievement in exploration, marking the first documented European presence in the Americas, a testament to the courage, skill, and adventurous spirit of the Viking Age. While Leif Eriksson's initial expedition successfully identified and named Helluland, Markland, and Vinland, and even established a temporary base at Leifsbudir, his stay was relatively brief. The true test of Norse ambition in this new world would come with subsequent voyages aimed at more permanent settlement and resource exploitation. These later expeditions, chronicled with varying details in the Saga of Eric the Red and the Saga of the Greenlanders, highlight the immense difficulties and the complex human drama that unfolded on these distant shores. Following Leif's return to Greenland, with a valuable cargo of timber and tales of Vinland's bounty, his siblings and other prominent Norse figures were eager to follow up on his discoveries. Leif's brother, Thorvald Eriksson, led one such expedition. According to the sagas, Thorvald and his crew utilized Leif's original camp at Leifsbudir. During their explorations, they encountered a group of Scrallings hiding under skin-covered boats. In a typically aggressive Viking fashion, they attacked and killed all but one, who escaped and returned with a larger force. In the ensuing battle, Thorvald was fatally wounded by an arrow, reputedly saying, "I have been wounded under my arm. I think I have spoken a true word that I should make my home here for a while." He was buried in Vinland, becoming one of the first recorded European deaths in North America. This tragic encounter underscored the perilous nature of relations with the indigenous population. Another of Leif's brothers, Thorstein Eriksson, attempted a voyage to retrieve Thorvald's body, but his expedition was plagued by storms and disease, and he himself died in Greenland before ever reaching Vinland. His wife Gudrid Thorbjørnardóttir, a remarkable figure who features prominently in the sagas, would later play a crucial role in the most significant attempt at Norse colonization. This major colonizing expedition was led by Thorfinn Karlsefni, a wealthy and capable Icelandic merchant and explorer who married the widowed Gudrid. Around 1010 AD, Karlsefni organized a substantial venture, possibly involving 3 ships and as many as 160 people, though numbers vary between sagas, including women and livestock, a clear indication of intent for permanent settlement. Gudrid accompanied him, and their party also included other notable figures from the Greenland colony. They sailed to Vinland, likely reoccupying or expanding upon Leif's original settlement. The initial period, according to some accounts, was promising. The land was fertile, there was ample grazing for their livestock, and they began felling timber. It was during this period in Vinland that Gudrid gave birth to a son, Snorri Thorfinnsson, who is widely considered the first European child born in the Americas. However, the presence of a larger, more permanent Norse settlement inevitably led to increased contact, subsequently, conflict with the Scrallings. The sagas describe initial trading encounters, where the Norse offered red cloth and perhaps dairy products in exchange for furs. Strict rules were supposedly set by Karlsefni to manage these trades, forbidding the exchange of weapons. Despite these precautions, tensions flared. One account tells of a Scralling attempting to steal a weapon, leading to his death, and an escalation of hostilities. Another describes a bull belonging to the Norsemen breaking loose and terrifying the Skrallings, which may have shattered a fragile peace. The Skrallings, far from being passive victims, mounted organized attacks on the Norse settlement. The sagas speak of them attacking in large numbers, using projectiles from slings or catapult-like devices, and emitting fierce war cries. The Norse, with their iron swords and axes, had superior weaponry in close combat, but they were vastly outnumbered and in unfamiliar territory. One particularly vivid account in the saga of Eric the Red describes a battle where the Norsemen were nearly overwhelmed. It tells of Freydis Eriksdóttir, Leif's fiercely independent, and in some tales, ruthless sister, who, seeing the men retreat, supposedly berated them for their cowardice, seized a sword from a fallen Norseman, and baring her breast and slapping it with the sword, let out such a fearsome cry that the Skrallings were startled and retreated. While the historicity of Freydis's specific actions is debated, the tale reflects the desperate nature of the fighting and the courage, or ferocity, sometimes displayed. Despite their martial prowess, the Norse found the pressure untenable. The constant threat of attack, the casualties sustained, and the dawning realization that they could not secure a lasting peace or dominance over the numerous indigenous inhabitants weighed heavily on them. The sagas indicate internal strife within the Norse group as well, which would have further weakened their position. After approximately 3 years in Vinland, facing sustained hostility and recognizing the immense difficulties of maintaining their isolated outpost, Thorfinn Karlsefni and his group made the decision to abandon the settlement and return to Greenland and eventually to Iceland. They brought back valuable cargoes of timber and furs, and the stories of their experiences, including the birth of Snorri, added to the growing legend of Vinland. The failure of Karlsefni's relatively large and well-equipped expedition effectively marked the end of concerted Norse attempts to colonize North America. While there is some archaeological and textual evidence to suggest that Greenlanders may have continued to make sporadic voyages to Markland for timber for another few centuries, the dream of permanent Norse settlements in Vinland died. The combination of distance from their homelands, limited manpower, and crucially, the resilient and ultimately overwhelming presence of the indigenous peoples proved too great a set of obstacles for the Vikings of the early 11th century. Their remarkable chapter of exploration in the New World thus drew to a close, leaving behind only faint traces and enduring sagas. The abandonment of Thorfinn Karlsefni's settlement in Vinland, around 1013 AD, or shortly thereafter, signalled a significant turning point in the Norse engagement with North America. While the dream of establishing lasting colonies in this fertile new land had proven untenable in the face of native resistance and logistical challenges, it did not necessarily mean an immediate and complete cessation of all Norse activity across the Western Ocean. The primary allure of the newly discovered lands, beyond the initial promise of settlement, lay in their resources, particularly timber. Greenland, the Norse staging point for these westward voyages, was a treeless land. Wood for building, ship repair and fuel was an extremely scarce and valuable commodity, often necessitating imports from Norway. Markland, likely Labrador, with its extensive forests, represented a much closer and potentially more accessible source of this vital material. There is evidence, both textual and archaeological, albeit more sparse and indirect, to suggest that voyages from the Greenland settlements to Markland to procure timber may have continued for some time, possibly for several centuries after the Vinland colonization attempts ceased. The Icelandic annals, for example, contain a cryptic entry for the year 1347, mentioning a Greenlandic ship, small in size, that had sailed to Markland but was then storm-driven to Iceland. This tantalizing reference implies that knowledge of Markland and the routes to it persisted among the Greenlandic Norse long after the Vinland dream faded. Furthermore, archaeological finds in Greenlandic Norse farmsteads have included pieces of worked wood identified as originating from North American tree species not native to Greenland or Iceland, such as butternut and certain types of pine. These finds lend credence to the idea of continued, if perhaps infrequent, resource-gathering expeditions. Such voyages would have been hazardous undertakings, requiring skilled seamanship and a willingness to venture into territories where encounters with Skrallings remained a potential threat. It is likely these were not attempts at settlement but rather targeted missions to harvest timber and perhaps other resources like furs. However, the capacity of the Greenlandic Norse community to mount such expeditions was intrinsically linked to its own viability. The Norse settlements in Greenland, established by Eric the Red in the late 10th century, existed on the very fringe of the habitable world for European-style agriculture and animal husbandry. For several centuries, they survived, adapting to the harsh Arctic environment, engaging in hunting, particularly for walrus ivory, a valuable export to Europe, and maintaining a distinct Norse Christian culture. But by the 14th and 15th centuries, the Greenlandic colony began to decline. Several factors are believed to have contributed to this. The onset of the Little Ice Age brought colder temperatures, shorter growing seasons, and increased sea ice, making agriculture more difficult and navigation more perilous. This would have severely impacted their ability to sustain themselves and to maintain contact with Iceland and Norway. As European trade routes shifted and Norway itself experienced political and economic changes, regular communication and trade with Greenland became less frequent, leaving the colony increasingly isolated. Concurrently, the ancestors of the modern Inuit, the Tula people, were expanding southwards into Greenland during this period. They were exceptionally well adapted to the Arctic environment, possessing superior hunting techniques for Arctic marine mammals. Competition for resources, and possibly direct conflict, may have put further pressure on the Norse settlements. Some scholars also argue that centuries of Norse farming practices, such as grazing livestock, may have led to soil erosion and pasture degradation in the limited fertile areas of Greenland, and that the Norse Greenlanders were perhaps conservative and slow to fully adapt their lifestyle and economy to the changing Arctic conditions, unlike the more flexible Tula culture. By the mid-15th century, written records of the Norse Greenlandic settlement cease, and archaeological evidence suggests that the western settlement had been abandoned by the mid-14th century, with the eastern settlement eventually succumbing by the mid to late 15th century. The exact circumstances of its final demise remain a subject of historical investigation, but it was a gradual fading away rather than a sudden catastrophe. The decline and eventual disappearance of the Norse Greenland colony inevitably meant the end of any further Norse voyages to North America. With their primary Atlantic outpost gone, the knowledge of the routes to Helluland, Markland, and Vinland, once preserved by generations of seafarers, would have eventually faded into the realm of myth and legend, preserved only in the Icelandic sagas. Thus, the Viking chapter in North America, so boldly begun by Leif Erikson and his contemporaries, concluded not with a dramatic defeat, but with a slow withdrawal dictated by the immense challenges of distance, environment, native resistance, and ultimately the collapse of their Greenlandic bridgehead. For nearly 5 centuries, the continent would remain beyond European consciousness, until new mariners from a different European era, driven by new ambitions and equipped with new technologies, would once again make landfall on its shores, unaware of the faint Norse footprints that had long since been erased by time and tide. The sagas, however, remained, holding the memory of these pioneering voyages, a testament to a remarkable, if ultimately ephemeral, Norse presence in the New World. The sagas, though committed to parchment primarily in the 13th and 14th centuries, centuries after the events they described, became the crucial vessels holding the memory of the Vinland voyages. For a long period in European history, these accounts were largely unknown outside of Iceland and parts of Scandinavia, or if known, were often dismissed as folklore or mythological tales by the wider scholarly world. The idea of Europeans reaching the Americas before Columbus was not a mainstream historical concept. The world depicted in medieval European mappamundi, maps of the world, showed Asia, Africa, and Europe, with the vast Atlantic Ocean, largely an empty, unknown expanse, often populated in the imagination with sea monsters and impenetrable mists. However, within Icelandic literary tradition, the stories of Eric the Red, Leif Erikson, Thorfinn Karlsefni, and Gudrid Thorbjarnardóttir were preserved with remarkable consistency, passed down through generations. These were not just tales of adventure, but also complex family histories, records of exploration, and accounts of interactions with new lands and peoples. They detailed the routes taken, the lands discovered Helluland, Markland, Vinland, the resources found timber, salmon, grapes, furs, and the often violent encounters with the Skralling jar. The rediscovery of these sagas by a broader European audience began in the early modern period, particularly as interest in exploration and the history of the New World grew. Following Columbus's voyages, scholars began to study the Old Norse texts, and translations started to appear. Initially, there was considerable skepticism regarding their historical accuracy, especially concerning the claims of North American landfalls. Vinland was often thought to be a mythical place, or perhaps a confused reference to some island closer to Europe. However, throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, antiquarians, historians, and archaeologists began to look more seriously at the geographical descriptions and navigational details within the sagas. Figures like Carl Christian Raffan in the 1830s meticulously analysed the sagas and argued strongly for their historical veracity, attempting to pinpoint the locations of Helluland, Markland, and Vinland on modern maps. While some of these early identifications were later revised, they sparked intense interest and debate. The turning point in the academic and public perception of the Vinland sagas came with the archaeological discoveries at Lance og Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, by Helge and Anne Steiningstad in the 1960s. As previously mentioned, the unearthing of an undeniably Norse settlement, radiocarbon dated to the precise period of the Vinland voyages, circa 1000 AD, provided the tangible, irrefutable proof that had long been sought. It demonstrated that the sagas were not mere fiction, but contained a core of historical truth. Lance og Meadows transformed the Vinland story from legend to history, confirming that Vikings were indeed the first known Europeans to set foot in North America. The discovery had profound implications. It reshaped the understanding of pre-Columbian transatlantic contact and highlighted the remarkable maritime capabilities of the Norse. It also brought a renewed focus on the sagas themselves as valuable historical documents, prompting further research into their narratives, their transmission, and their interpretation. Today, the Vinland voyages are a recognized part of world history. Lance of Meadows is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a testament to this early European presence. While the Norse settlements in North America were not permanent and had no lasting direct impact on the subsequent history or development of the continent in the way later European colonization did, they represent an extraordinary chapter of human endeavor. They speak to the courage, resilience, and exploratory spirit of the Viking Age. The story of Leif Erikson and Vinland also continues to fascinate because it touches upon universal themes, the allure of the unknown, the challenges of encountering new environments and different cultures, and the complexities of human ambition and failure. The interactions with the Skrallings, however sparsely detailed and biased by the Norse perspective of the sagas, offer a poignant, if tragic, glimpse into one of the earliest instances of European indigenous contact in the Americas, foreshadowing the far more extensive and transformative encounters that would begin 5 centuries later. The legacy of Vinland is thus not just one of discovery, but also a reminder of the often fraught nature of such historical intersections. The echoes of those ancient voyages continue to resonate, prompting ongoing research and ensuring that the tale of the Vikings in the New World remains a compelling and significant part of our shared past. The confirmation of a Norse presence in North America around 1000 AD, spearheaded by the discoveries at Lance og Meadows, naturally led to further scholarly inquiry and, at times, popular speculation. While the core fact of their arrival is now undisputed, several questions and areas of research continue to engage historians, archaeologists, and linguists. One area of ongoing discussion revolves around the extent of Norse exploration beyond Lance og Meadows and the precise location of the various lands described in the sagas. While Lance og Meadows is definitively Norse, its characteristics do not perfectly match all descriptions of Vinland, particularly the abundance of wild grapes, which are not native to Newfoundland's northern tip. This has led to theories that Lansoc Meadows might have served as a gateway settlement, a base camp, or a wintering site, from which further explorations were launched southward into regions where grapes could indeed be found, such as the Gulf of St. Lawrence, or even further down the North American coast, perhaps as far as modern-day New England. The sagas themselves are somewhat ambiguous and occasionally contradictory regarding geographical details, making precise correlations with modern geography challenging. Archaeological evidence for other Norse sites further south has yet to be conclusively found, though various claims and purported artifacts have emerged over the years, often to be debunked or remain unverified. Another fascinating aspect is the potential for limited cultural or genetic exchange between the Norse and the indigenous Skrælingjar. The sagas primarily describe conflict and failed trade, but the possibility of other, unrecorded interactions, however brief or isolated, cannot be entirely dismissed. Genetic studies looking for Norse markers in some Native American populations have been undertaken, but thus far, the results have not provided definitive evidence of significant intermingling during the Vinland period. The brevity of the Norse presence and their small numbers would have limited the opportunities for such exchange to leave a lasting, detectable trace. The question of why the Norse settlements failed to endure, unlike later European colonial ventures, is also a significant point of analysis. As previously touched upon, the combination of factors was formidable. The vast distances and logistical challenges of supporting a colony from Greenland, which was itself a marginal settlement, the limited manpower the Norse could commit, the environmental challenges of adapting to a new, albeit sometimes richer, ecosystem, and critically, the sustained resistance from a numerically superior and well-adapted indigenous population. Unlike the later European colonizers, who arrived with overwhelming technological advantages, firearms, steel armor, more robust immune systems against Old World diseases, which tragically decimated native populations later on, and the backing of powerful nation-states with significant resources, the 11th century Norse possessed fewer decisive advantages and faced a more level playing field in terms of conflict with the Skrælingjar. Furthermore, the internal dynamics of the Norse groups themselves, as hinted at in the sagas, including disputes and rivalries, such as those involving Freydis Eiríksdóttir, may have contributed to instability and the eventual decision to withdraw. The Vinland venture was in essence a private enterprise undertaken by a few leading families from a small, remote European outpost, lacking the sustained state-sponsored support that characterized later colonial efforts. The impact of the Vinland voyages on Europe at the time appears to have been minimal. Knowledge of these western lands seems to have remained largely confined to Iceland and Scandinavia, and perhaps within certain ecclesiastical circles. Adam of Bremen, a German cleric writing around 1075 AD, made a brief mention of Vinland, likely based on information from Danish sources, describing it as a land where wild grapes grew. It did not spark a wave of further European exploration or colonization of the Americas in that era. The Old World was not yet poised for the kind of transatlantic expansion that would occur in the late 15th and 16th centuries, driven by different geopolitical, economic, and technological imperatives. Today, the legacy of the Norse in North America is primarily one of historical and archaeological significance. It has enriched our understanding of Viking Age capabilities and the complex tapestry of global exploration. It serves as a crucial counter-narrative to the more traditional Columbus-centric view of the discovery of the Americas, highlighting that transatlantic voyages occurred much earlier, albeit with different outcomes. The story continues to capture the public imagination, inspiring literature, film, and ongoing research, ensuring that the tales of Leif Erikson, Gudrid Thorbjarnardóttir, and the land they called Vinland remain a vibrant part of our understanding of the medieval world and its far-reaching connections. The faint echoes of their longships on distant shores remind us of the enduring human impulse to explore and the often unpredictable consequences of encountering the unknown. Let us delve a little deeper into the probable daily realities and mindset of those Norse settlers who briefly called Vinland home before drawing our account to a broader conclusion. The sagas, while focused on the grand deeds of chieftains and the drama of conflict, offer glimpses into the challenges of establishing a European way of life in an entirely alien environment. Upon establishing their settlements, like Leifsbudir or Thorfinn Karlsefni's camp, the Norse would have immediately set about constructing dwellings. These were likely similar in style to those found in Greenland and Iceland, longhouses built with turf walls over a timber frame, designed to provide insulation against the cold. The interiors would have been simple, with a central hearth for cooking and warmth, and raised platforms along the walls for sleeping and sitting. The smell of wood smoke, damp wool, and cooked food would have filled these dim spaces. Animal husbandry, a cornerstone of Norse agriculture, was attempted. Karlsefni's expedition brought livestock, and the sagas mention cattle grazing in Vinland's pastures. This would have required considerable effort in terms of tending the animals, protecting them from predators unknown in Greenland, and ensuring sufficient fodder, especially for the winter months. Fishing and hunting would have been crucial for sustenance. The sagas praise Vinland for its abundant salmon, and the Norse, skilled fishermen, would have exploited this resource. They also hunted local game, though the specifics are less detailed. Foraging for edible plants, berries beyond the famed grapes, and nuts would have supplemented their diet. The women in these expeditions, figures like Gudrid Thorbjarnardóttir, played vital roles, not only in domestic tasks such as food preparation, dairying, and making woolen clothing vardamal, but also in maintaining the social fabric and cultural continuity of these small isolated communities. The birth of Snorri Thorfinnsson in Vinland, for instance, would have been a significant event, a symbol of hope for the colony's future, however fleeting. The crafting of tools and repair of equipment would have been ongoing necessities. The smithy discovered at Larnsorg Meadows indicates that they were working iron, likely bog iron found locally or recycled from existing implements, to create or repair nails, rivets for their ships, and basic tools. Woodworking, given the abundance of timber in Markland and Vinland, would have been a primary activity, felling trees, shaping planks for buildings and boats, and crafting household items. Spiritually, these were Norse people in transition. Christianity was taking hold in Greenland and Iceland around this period, but older pagan beliefs and practices likely still lingered, especially in moments of stress or when facing the unknown. Their worldview was one where the natural world was often imbued with supernatural forces, and encounters in this new strange land might have been interpreted through that lens. The fear of the Skrælingjar was not just of physical danger, but perhaps also of the unknown spiritual power of these other people. The decision to abandon Vinland, therefore, was not taken lightly. It represented the failure of a significant investment of resources, human effort, and hope. It was an admission that this particular frontier, for all its initial promise, was too distant, too dangerous, and its original inhabitants too resilient for the Norse of that era to overcome. The return voyages to Greenland would have been tinged with disappointment, but also laden with valuable timber and furs, and perhaps most importantly, with the stories that would become the sagas, the enduring record of their bold endeavour. In the grand tapestry of world history, the Norse voyages to North America around 1000 AD stand as a remarkable, if somewhat isolated, thread. While they did not lead to permanent European settlement or transform the trajectory of the Americas in the way later voyages would, their significance is undeniable. They represent the westernmost reach of the Viking expansion, a testament to their extraordinary maritime skills, their courage in the face of the unknown, and their relentless drive for new lands and resources. The Vinland venture demonstrates that the capacity for transatlantic travel existed long before the innovations of the Renaissance. It highlights that the discovery of continents is often a complex, multi-layered process, involving various peoples and encounters over time, rather than a single definitive event. The interactions between the Norse and the Skrælingjar, though often viewed through the biased lens of the sagas, offer a poignant early glimpse into the dynamics of intercultural contact in the New World, a preview of the profound and often tragic encounters that would shape the continents 5 centuries later. The eventual fading of the Vinland settlements, and even the Greenland colony itself, serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of human enterprise on the frontiers of the known world, especially when faced with environmental challenges and the resistance of established populations. The Norse lacked the demographic weight, the state-sponsored backing, and perhaps some of the crucial technological and immunological advantages that would later enable widespread European colonization. Yet the legacy of Vinland endured, carried in the powerful oral traditions of Iceland, eventually committed to parchment in the sagas. These narratives, once dismissed by many as mere myth, have been vindicated by archaeology, most notably at Landsark's Meadows. This site stands today as a UNESCO World Heritage Monument, a tangible link to this distant past, allowing us to connect with the lives of these early European explorers on North American soil. The story of Leif Erikson and Vinland continues to capture the imagination, not just as a historical footnote, but as a compelling human drama. It speaks of ambition, courage, hardship, and the enduring human quest to explore beyond the horizon. It reminds us that history is often more complex and interconnected than once thought, and that even forgotten footprints can, with time and research, be rediscovered, enriching our understanding of the shared human journey across the globe. The echoes of those Norse longships, though faint, still resonate, a whisper from a distant shore in the ongoing narrative of global exploration. Let us delve a little deeper into the probable daily realities and mindset of those Norse settlers who briefly called Vinland home, before drawing our account to a broader conclusion. The sagas, while focused on the grand deeds of chieftains and the drama of conflict, offer glimpses into the challenges of establishing a European way of life in an entirely alien environment. Upon establishing their settlements, like Lifsburðir or Thorfinnkarlsefni's camp, the Norse would have immediately set about constructing dwellings. These were likely similar in style to those found in Greenland and Iceland, long houses built with turf walls over a timber frame, designed to provide insulation against the cold. The interiors would have been simple, with a central hearth for cooking and warmth, and raised platforms along the walls for sleeping and sitting. The smell of wood smoke, damp wool, and cooked food would have filled these dim spaces. Animal husbandry, a cornerstone of Norse agriculture, was attempted. Karlsefni's expedition brought livestock, and the sagas mention cattle grazing in Vinland's pastures. This would have required considerable effort in terms of tending the animals, protecting them from predators unknown in Greenland, and ensuring sufficient fodder, especially for the winter months. Fishing and hunting would have been crucial for sustenance. The sagas praise Vinland for its abundant salmon, and the Norse, skilled fishermen, would have exploited this resource. They also hunted local game, though the specifics are less detailed. Foraging for edible plants, berries beyond the famed grapes, and nuts would have supplemented their diet. The women in these expeditions, figures like Gudrid Thorbjarnardóttir, played vital roles, not only in domestic tasks such as food preparation, dairying, and making woolen clothing, vadmal, but also in maintaining the social fabric and cultural continuity of these small, isolated communities. The birth of Snorri Thorfinnsson in Vinland, for instance, would have been a significant event, a symbol of hope for the colony's future, however fleeting. The crafting of tools and repair of equipment would have been ongoing necessities. The smithy discovered at Landsark Meadows indicates that they were working iron, likely bog iron found locally or recycled from existing implements, to create or repair nails, rivets for their ships, and basic tools. Woodworking, given the abundance of timber in Markland and Vinland, would have been a primary activity, felling trees, shaping planks for buildings and boats, and crafting household items. Spiritually, these were Norse people in transition. Christianity was taking hold in Greenland and Iceland around this period, but older pagan beliefs and practices likely still lingered, especially in moments of stress or when facing the unknown. Their worldview was one where the natural world was often imbued with supernatural forces, and encounters in this new, strange land might have been interpreted through that lens. The fear of the Skralling jar was not just of physical danger, but perhaps also of the unknown spiritual power of these other people. The decision to abandon Vinland, therefore, was not taken lightly. It represented the failure of a significant investment of resources, human effort, and hope. It was an admission that this particular frontier, for all its initial promise, was too distant, too dangerous, and its original inhabitants too resilient for the Norse of that era to overcome. The return voyages to Greenland would have been tinged with disappointment, but also laden with valuable timber and furs, and perhaps most importantly, with the stories that would become the sagas, the enduring record of their bold endeavour. In the grand tapestry of world history, the Norse voyages to North America around 1000 AD stand as a remarkable, if somewhat isolated, thread. While they did not lead to permanent European settlement or transform the trajectory of the Americas in the way later voyages would, their significance is undeniable. They represent the westernmost reach of the Viking expansion, a testament to their extraordinary maritime skills, their courage in the face of the unknown, and their relentless drive for new lands and resources. The Vinland venture demonstrates that the capacity for transatlantic travel existed long before the innovations of the Renaissance. It highlights that the discovery of continents is often a complex, multi-layered process involving various peoples and encounters over time, rather than a single, definitive event. The interactions between the Norse and the Skrælingjar, though often viewed through the biased lens of the sagas, offer a poignant early glimpse into the dynamics of intercultural contact in the New World, a preview of the profound and often tragic encounters that would shape the continents 5 centuries later. The eventual fading of the Vinland settlements, and even the Greenland colony itself, serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of human enterprise on the frontiers of the known world, especially when faced with environmental challenges and the resistance of established populations. The Norse lacked the demographic weight, the state-sponsored backing, and perhaps some of the crucial technological and immunological advantages that would later enable widespread European colonization. Yet, the legacy of Vinland endured, carried in the powerful oral traditions of Iceland, eventually committed to parchment in the sagas. These narratives, once dismissed by many as mere myth, have been vindicated by archaeology, most notably at Lancer Meadows. This site stands today as a UNESCO World Heritage Monument, a tangible link to this distant past, allowing us to connect with the lives of these early European explorers on North American soil. The story of Leif Erikson and Vinland continues to capture the imagination, not just as a historical footnote, but as a compelling human drama. It speaks of ambition, courage, hardship, and the enduring human quest to explore beyond the horizon. It reminds us that history is often more complex and interconnected than once thought, and that even forgotten footprints can, with time and research, be rediscovered, enriching our understanding of the shared human journey across the globe. The echoes of those Norse longships, though faint, still resonate, a whisper from a distant shore in the ongoing narrative of global exploration. The sagas, however, remained, holding the memory of these pioneering voyages, a testament to a remarkable, if ultimately ephemeral, Norse presence in the New World. For nearly 5 centuries, after the last echoes of Norse activity faded from the shores of Vinland, the vast continents of the Americas would remain a world unto themselves, their existence largely undreamt of by the scholars and seafarers of Europe. The drive to explore, to push beyond the horizon, seemed to lie dormant in the collective European consciousness, or was perhaps directed elsewhere, towards different frontiers. The age of the longship gave way to new designs, new ambitions, and eventually new technologies that would once again turn eyes westward across the great Atlantic. When European attention finally, and irrevocably, turned back to the lands across the ocean in the late 15th century, with the voyages of Columbus and those who followed, it was driven by a potent mix of imperial ambition, religious zeal, and the lure of untold riches, spices, silks, and precious metals. This new age of exploration, while vastly different in scale, technology, and consequence from the Norse ventures, shared that ancient fundamental human impulse, the quest for what lay beyond, the hope of fortune, and the dream of a new beginning. Generations passed, empires rose and fell, the New World was carved up, colonized and transformed, and then in the mid-19th century, on the far western edge of a continent, now largely mapped and claimed, another kind of fever gripped the imagination, one that echoed, in its raw elemental appeal, the promises that might have once lured Norsemen to the fabled shores of Vinland. It was not the allure of fertile land for settlement or forests for timber that primarily drew this new wave, but something far more immediate, far more dazzling: gold. The cry of gold echoing from the foothills of California's Sierra Nevada in early 1848 was a spark that ignited one of the most significant and transformative mass migrations in American history, the California Gold Rush. What began as a serendipitous discovery at a remote sawmill would within months draw hundreds of thousands of fortune seekers from across the nation and around the globe, all consumed by the dream of instant wealth and a new life in a land that had only just been formally acquired by the United States. The story begins on January 24, 1848, at Sutter's Mill, a sawmill being constructed by James W. Marshall on the South Fork of the American River, near Coloma, California. Marshall was a carpenter and frontiersman employed by John Sutter, a Swiss immigrant who had established a vast agricultural colony called Nueva Helvetia, New Switzerland, centered around Sutter's Fort, modern-day Sacramento. While inspecting the tail race of the nearly completed mill, Marshall noticed shiny flecks in the channel bed. "I have found it," he reportedly told his workers, after conducting some crude tests that suggested the metal was indeed gold. Initially, both Marshall and Sutter attempted to keep the discovery quiet. Sutter, whose ambitions were focused on creating an agricultural empire, feared that a gold rush would disrupt his workforce and undermine his plans. He envisioned a future built on crops and livestock, not the chaotic pursuit of mineral wealth. However, news of such magnitude is rarely contained for long. Despite their efforts, rumors began to spread, carried by workers from the mill and by word of mouth. The initial reports were met with some skepticism. California was a distant, sparsely populated territory, recently ceded to the United States by Mexico at the end of the Mexican-American War through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, signed in February 1848, though news of the treaty and the gold discovery would cross paths, often with the gold news arriving first in some eastern quarters. Communications were slow, and tales of gold strikes were not uncommon, often proving to be exaggerated or false. However, the trickle of rumors became a flood when Samuel Brannan, a shrewd storekeeper and newspaper publisher in the fledgling town of San Francisco, took decisive action. Seeing a business opportunity, Brannan, after confirming the richness of the initial finds, strode through the streets of San Francisco in May 1848, holding aloft a bottle filled with gold dust and shouting, "Gold, gold, gold from the American River." His pronouncements, coupled with the tangible evidence, shattered any lingering doubts. San Francisco, then a small port town, emptied out almost overnight as its able-bodied men abandoned their jobs, their ships, and their homes to head for the gold fields. Sailors deserted their vessels in the bay, leaving a forest of masts. Merchants closed their shops. Soldiers deserted their posts. The cry had truly taken hold. By late 1848, word had spread beyond California. Newspapers on the East Coast, initially cautious, began to publish more sensational accounts as ships arrived with gold and first-hand reports. President James K. Polk, in his address to Congress in December 1848, officially confirmed the abundance of gold in California, lending federal weight to the claims and electrifying the nation. This presidential endorsement is often seen as the true catalyst that launched the nationwide, and soon international, stampede. The year 1849 became synonymous with the gold rush, and those who flocked to California in pursuit of fortune were dubbed 49ers. They came from every state in the Union, and from virtually every corner of the globe, from Europe, Latin America, especially Sonora in Mexico, and Chile, Australia, and even China. They faced arduous journeys. Those from the eastern United States had several routes, each fraught with its own perils. Many chose the grueling overland trek across the plains and mountains via routes like the Oregon Trail, California Trail, or Santa Fe Trail. This journey, covering over 2,000 miles, could take 4 to 6 months, exposing travelers to harsh weather, difficult terrain, disease like cholera, potential conflicts with Native American tribes whose lands they traversed, and the constant challenges of dwindling supplies and exhaustion. Wagon trains became a common sight. Others opted for the sea route via Cape Horn, an 18,000 nautical mile voyage around the treacherous tip of South America, that could take 5 to 8 months, facing storms and cramped conditions. A third, faster but often more expensive and disease-ridden option, was the sea and isthmus route, involving ships to Panama or Nicaragua, a difficult trek through tropical jungles, and then another ship to San Francisco, with high risks of malaria and yellow fever. Regardless of the route chosen, the journey was a massive undertaking, a gamble made on the hope of striking it rich. The promise of California was not just gold, but for many a chance to escape economic hardship, social constraints, or simply the mundane, and to participate in an adventure of epic proportions. The world was converging on California, a remote and ill-prepared territory about to be transformed forever. The influx of people into California during 1849 and the early 1850s was staggering. San Francisco, once a sleepy village of a few hundred, exploded into a bustling, chaotic boomtown of tens of thousands almost overnight. Ships crowded its bay, many abandoned by their crews who had joined the rush for gold, their empty hulls eventually becoming makeshift warehouses, stores, or even jails. Tents and hastily constructed wooden shanties sprang up haphazardly to house the burgeoning population, creating a city characterized by frenetic energy, ambition, and often lawlessness. Life in the goldfields, or diggings as they were called, was arduous and uncertain. The initial, easily accessible placer gold, found in riverbeds and streams, gold that could be extracted with simple tools like pans, rockers, cradles, and sluice boxes, was quickly exhausted in many areas. Prospectors, or argonauts, often worked long hours under the hot California sun, or in icy river waters, enduring back-breaking labor for what was frequently a meager return. While a lucky few did strike it rich, finding large nuggets or rich veins, the vast majority found only enough gold to subsist, or nothing at all. The romantic image of the lone prospector, easily plucking gold from a stream, soon gave way to the harsher reality of hard work, disappointment, and intense competition. Mining camps with colorful names like Hangtown, named for its swift, summary justice, Whiskey Flat, Skunk Gulch, and bedbugs sprouted throughout the Sierra Nevada foothills, wherever gold was discovered. These camps were often primitive and unsanitary, lacking basic amenities and any formal governance in their early days. Disease, such as dysentery, scurvy, and typhoid, was rampant due to poor sanitation, contaminated water, and inadequate diet. Accidents were common, and violence was an ever-present threat in an environment where fortunes could be made or lost quickly, and where disputes were often settled with fists, knives, or guns. Makeshift systems of miners' law emerged to deal with claim disputes and criminal acts, often summary and harsh, but providing a semblance of order in the absence of formal legal structures. The social fabric of Gold Rush California was incredibly diverse, a chaotic mix of peoples from all walks of life and corners of the globe. Alongside Americans from every state were experienced miners from Mexico and Chile, Europeans, Irish, Germans, French, British, Australians, and a significant number of Chinese immigrants. This multicultural environment was often fraught with tension and prejudice. Foreign miners, particularly Latin Americans and Chinese, faced discriminatory laws such as the foreign miners' tax, and often violent nativist sentiment from American miners who resented their presence and success. Despite this, these groups persisted, contributing significantly to the economy and the cultural makeup of the developing territory. The gold rush had a profound and devastating impact on the indigenous Native American populations of California. The sudden influx of hundreds of thousands of miners and settlers into their ancestral lands led to widespread displacement, destruction of their traditional food sources, as rivers were dammed and diverted, and game was overhunted, and exposure to new diseases against which they had no immunity. Violence against Native Americans was common and often brutal, with many instances of massacres and forced removals. The native population, estimated at around 150,000 before the gold rush, plummeted dramatically within a few short decades due to disease, starvation, and violence, a tragic consequence of the gold-fueled expansion. Similarly, the Californios, the Spanish-speaking residents who had lived in California when it was part of Mexico, found their way of life irrevocably altered. While some Californios participated in the gold rush, many saw their vast ranchos encroached upon by squatters, their land titles challenged in unfamiliar American courts, and their political and economic influence diminish rapidly as the Anglo-American population swelled. Economically, the gold rush was a massive boon, not just for California, but for the United States as a whole. Vast quantities of gold were extracted, injecting significant capital into the American economy and fueling its westward expansion and industrial development. However, the individuals who often profited most were not the average prospectors, but the merchants, entrepreneurs, and suppliers who catered to the needs of the mining population. Figures like Samuel Brannan, who had first publicized the gold discovery, became wealthy by selling mining equipment, food, and other necessities at vastly inflated prices. Towns and cities like Sacramento and Stockton grew rapidly as supply centers for the diggings. San Francisco became the financial and commercial hub of the entire West Coast. The gold rush also dramatically accelerated California's path to statehood. The rapid population increase and the need for a more stable civil government led to calls for California to be admitted to the Union. In 1850, as part of the Compromise of 1850, California entered the Union as a free state, a development that further inflamed tensions between North and South over the issue of slavery. As the 1850s progressed, the nature of gold mining in California began to change. Placer deposits became harder to find, and mining became more industrialized. Hydraulic mining, which involved using powerful jets of water to wash away entire hillsides to get at gold deposits, caused immense environmental damage, silting up rivers and destroying landscapes. Quartz or hard rock mining, which required tunneling deep into the earth to extract gold from quartz veins, demanded significant capital investment, machinery, and organized labor, pushing out the individual prospector in favor of larger mining companies. By the late 1850s, the peak of the initial frenzy had passed, though gold mining continued to be a significant industry in California for decades. Many of the 49ers who had not struck it rich either returned home, often poorer than when they started, or settled in California, turning to farming, ranching, or other trades, contributing to the permanent settlement and development of the state. The gold rush left an indelible mark on California, transforming it from a remote, sparsely populated territory into a dynamic, multicultural, and economically vital state, while also leaving a complex legacy of rapid development, social upheaval, environmental change, and profound impacts on its diverse inhabitants. The societal landscape forged by the California gold rush was as turbulent and multifaceted as the methods used to extract the precious metal. Beyond the immediate toil in the diggings, boomtowns like San Francisco, Sacramento, and numerous smaller mining camps developed a unique, often precarious, social order. San Francisco, in particular, became a microcosm of the global convergence, a raw, energetic city where fortunes were made and lost not only in gold, but in commerce, land speculation, and vice. Its harbour remained choked with abandoned ships, some converted into buildings, others left to rot, stark symbols of the gold fever that had seized their crews. The city's population was overwhelmingly male in the initial years, creating a society with few traditional family structures or social restraints. This imbalance contributed to a boisterous, often lawless atmosphere. Entertainment in these frontier towns ranged from the rudimentary to the surprisingly elaborate. Saloons, gambling halls, and fandango houses, offering dancing and companionship, were ubiquitous, providing outlets for the miners' earnings and an escape from the drudgery of their labor. Theaters sprang up, hosting everything from Shakespearean plays to minstrel shows and bawdy entertainments, catering to a population starved for diversion. Prices for all goods and services were astronomically inflated due to scarcity and the influx of gold. A simple meal, a night's lodging, or basic tools could cost many times their value elsewhere, leading to the saying that in the gold rush, the surest way to mine gold was to mine the miners by providing them with goods and services. Women, though vastly outnumbered, played diverse and significant roles. Some came with their families on the arduous overland trails, enduring the same hardships as men. Others arrived independently, seeking economic opportunity or adventure. They worked as cooks, laundresses, boarding house keepers, entertainers, shopkeepers, and in some cases, even as miners themselves. Their presence, however limited, often brought a semblance of domesticity and stability to the chaotic camps and towns, and many women found opportunities for economic independence rarely available to them elsewhere at the time. Figures like Lucina Stanley Wilson, who arrived in 1849 and built a successful hotel and store, exemplified the resilience and entrepreneurial spirit of women during this period. As the easily accessible placer gold diminished, the nature of mining shifted, requiring more capital, technology, and organized labor. Hydraulic mining, which emerged in the mid-1850s, involved directing massive jets of water through large canvas hoses and iron nozzles called monitors to wash away entire hillsides, channeling the resulting slurry through long sluices to capture the gold. While incredibly effective at extracting gold from vast quantities of earth, it was environmentally devastating. It choked rivers with sediment or slickens, destroyed agricultural land downstream, increased flood risks, and dramatically altered the landscape. This led to prolonged legal and political battles between mining interests and agricultural communities, culminating in landmark court decisions in the 1880s that severely restricted hydraulic mining. Quartz, or hard rock mining, also became prominent. This involved locating and then tunneling deep into mountainsides to follow veins of gold-bearing quartz. It required significant investment in machinery for crushing the quartz stamp mills, as well as skilled engineers and laborers for constructing tunnels and shafts. This shift from individual placer mining to industrialized hydraulic and hard rock mining marked a significant change in the gold rush economy, concentrating wealth in the hands of fewer, larger companies and transforming many independent prospectors into wage laborers. The legal and governmental framework of California struggled to keep pace with its explosive growth. The initial years were marked by a near absence of formal law enforcement outside of a few established towns. Miners often formed their own ad hoc courts and vigilante committees to administer justice, which could be swift and brutal, though sometimes surprisingly fair given the circumstances. The rapid achievement of statehood in 1850 was partly driven by the urgent need to establish a more stable legal and political system capable of managing the booming population and vast mineral wealth. By the late 1850s and into the 1860s, the initial frenzy of the gold rush had largely subsided. Gold production, while still significant, began to decline from its peak years. Many of the 49ers had either returned home, moved on to new gold strikes elsewhere, such as those in Nevada with the Comstock Lode, or later in Colorado and other western territories, or had settled permanently in California. The state's economy began to diversify, with agriculture, wheat, fruits, wine becoming increasingly important, alongside commerce, shipping, and manufacturing. The foundations laid during the gold rush, the influx of population, the development of infrastructure, however rudimentary at first, and the accumulation of capital, paved the way for California's emergence as a major economic and agricultural power in the United States. The legacy of the California gold rush is complex and multifaceted. It was a period of incredible optimism, individual striving, and rapid wealth creation for some. It dramatically accelerated the westward expansion of the United States and cemented California's place within the nation. It brought a diverse array of people to the Pacific coast, laying the groundwork for California's future multicultural identity. However, it also came at a tremendous cost: the devastation of Native American populations, the displacement of Californios, significant environmental degradation, and the often harsh, violent, and inequitable realities of life in a frontier boom society. It remains a pivotal, defining era in American history, a dramatic illustration of the powerful lure of gold and the profound, often unpredictable, transformations that can follow in its wake. The echoes of the 49ers' cry of gold continue to resonate in the story of California and the American West. The California gold rush, though its peak intensity lasted little more than a decade, cast a long shadow, fundamentally reshaping not only California, but also contributing significantly to the economic, social, and psychological landscape of the United States in the latter half of the 19th century and beyond. Its long-term consequences were as varied and complex as the multitude of individuals who participated in the Great Stampede. One of the most enduring impacts was demographic. The gold rush triggered one of the largest mass migrations in US history, drawing people from every corner of the globe. While many eventually left, a significant number stayed, transforming California from a sparsely populated, remote territory into a burgeoning, diverse state. This rapid influx of people, with their varied cultures, skills, and ambitions, laid the foundation for California's dynamic and multicultural society. The cities that had sprung up or boomed during the rush, especially San Francisco, cemented their roles as major centers of commerce, finance, and Pacific trade. San Francisco, in particular, with its magnificent natural harbor, became the undisputed Queen City of the West Coast, a vital link between the United States and Asia. Economically, the sheer volume of gold extracted, hundreds of millions of dollars worth at the prices of the day, provided a massive stimulus to the US economy. It helped finance the Union cause during the Civil War, backed the expansion of industry, and facilitated the development of a more stable national currency. The need to transport gold, supplies, and people also spurred innovations in transportation. While the overland trails remained important, the gold rush highlighted the need for faster, more reliable connections between the east and west coasts, contributing to the drive for the Transcontinental Railroad, which was completed in 1869. This monumental feat of engineering further integrated California into the nation, opening up new markets and facilitating further settlement. The gold rush also had a profound psychological impact, embedding itself deeply into the American psyche and its mythology of opportunity and reinvention. It popularized the California dream, the idea of California as a land of boundless possibility, where anyone through hard work, luck, or daring could achieve wealth and success. This dream, though often far removed from the harsh realities faced by most prospectors, became a powerful magnet, continuing to draw people westward for generations. The figure of the rugged, independent 49er became an iconic American archetype, symbolizing adventure, self-reliance, and the pursuit of fortune. Tales of the gold rush, both real and romanticized, filled popular literature, newspapers, and later, films, shaping the popular imagination of the American West. However, the darker aspects of its legacy also persisted. The environmental devastation caused by hydraulic mining, for instance, left scars on the landscape that are still visible today, and led to some of the earliest environmental conflicts and legal precedents regarding resource use in the United States. The displacement and decimation of Native American populations was a profound tragedy, a stark example of the destructive consequences of rapid, uncontrolled expansion and the pursuit of wealth at any cost. The patterns of racial and ethnic discrimination established during the gold rush, particularly against Chinese and Latin American immigrants, also cast a long shadow, contributing to ongoing social tensions. Furthermore, the gold rush fostered a boom and bust mentality, an economic volatility that would characterize many frontier resource rushes in the American West. The sudden influx of wealth often led to rampant speculation, inflation, and unstable financial markets. While some individuals amassed great fortunes, many more experienced disappointment and financial ruin. In the decades following the initial rush, California's economy gradually diversified. While gold mining continued, agriculture emerged as the state's dominant industry, with vast tracts of land brought under cultivation for wheat, fruits, vegetables, and wine grapes, ironically fulfilling John Sutter's original vision for the territory, albeit under vastly different circumstances. Commerce, manufacturing, and eventually, industries like oil, entertainment, and technology would further transform the state. The story of the California gold rush is thus a complex narrative of ambition and hardship, of unprecedented opportunity and profound injustice, of rapid transformation and enduring legacies. It was a defining moment that not only propelled California to prominence, but also played a crucial role in shaping the economic trajectory, social fabric, and cultural mythology of the United States as a whole. It remains a vivid chapter in the human pursuit of dreams, a stark reminder of the immense power of a simple, glittering metal to reshape lives, landscapes, and the course of history. The call of gold that echoed from Sutter's Mill in 1848 set in motion forces that continued to ripple through American society for many years, leaving an imprint that is still discernible today. The echoes of the 49ers' cry of gold had faded by the late 1850s and early 1860s, but the California gold rush left an indelible transformative mark on the American West and the nation as a whole. It had drawn hundreds of thousands to the Pacific coast, catapulted California into statehood, and injected vast wealth into the US economy. Yet, this rapid, almost frenetic development also highlighted a critical vulnerability: the immense geographical isolation of the West Coast from the established population centers and industrial heartland of the East. The arduous overland trails and the long, perilous sea voyages were slow, inefficient, and often dangerous ways to transport people, goods, and information across the vast continent. The dream of a more direct, rapid connection, a Pacific Railroad, had existed for years, championed by visionary entrepreneurs and politicians. The gold rush, however, provided a powerful new impetus. The need to bind the newly acquired and economically vital territories of the West, particularly California, more firmly to the Union, became a matter of national strategic and economic importance. The vast distances also posed a significant challenge for governance and military defense. The outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 further underscored the necessity of such a link, as concerns grew about the security of Western gold shipments and the potential for Confederate influence or even secessionist movements in the isolated West. Thus, amidst the turmoil of war, the US Congress took a monumental step. In 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed into law the Pacific Railway Act. This landmark legislation authorized the construction of the first transcontinental railroad in the United States, a feat of engineering and human endeavor that would rival any undertaken in the 19th century. The Act chartered two primary companies to undertake this colossal task: the Union Pacific Railroad, tasked with building westward from the Missouri River, specifically from Omaha, Nebraska, and the Central Pacific Railroad, tasked with building eastward from Sacramento, California, across the formidable Sierra Nevada mountains. The government provided significant incentives to these companies, including vast land grants along the railroad's right-of-way and government bonds issued per mile of track laid, with higher rates for track laid across more difficult terrain like mountains and plateaus. This created a powerful financial incentive for the companies to lay as much track as quickly as possible, leading to intense competition and at times questionable construction practices. The challenges facing both companies were immense, almost unimaginable by modern standards. For the Union Pacific, building westward from Omaha meant crossing the vast, seemingly endless Great Plains. While the terrain was relatively flat, they faced logistical nightmares in supplying their crews across hundreds of miles of sparsely populated territory. They contended with harsh weather, scorching summers and brutal winters, and significant resistance from Native American tribes, such as the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, whose ancestral lands and buffalo hunting grounds were being bisected and disrupted by the Iron Horse. The railroad workers, a diverse mix of Irish immigrants, many of whom were Civil War veterans, ex-soldiers, and frontiersmen, lived and worked in mobile hell-on-wheels, towns that followed the end of the track, often characterized by rough living conditions, gambling, and violence. The Union Pacific's chief engineer, Grenville M. Dodge, a former Union general, brought a military discipline and relentless drive to the construction effort, pushing his crews hard. For the Central Pacific, the obstacles were, if anything, even more daunting. Starting from Sacramento, their path was immediately blocked by the towering Sierra Nevada mountain range, a massive granite barrier that rose over 7,000 feet. This required incredible feats of engineering under the direction of its determined chief engineer, Theodore Judah, who had tirelessly championed the the central route through the Sierras before his untimely death. After Judah, Samuel S. Montague took over as chief engineer. The Big Four, Leland Stanford, Collis P. Huntington, Mark Hopkins, and Charles Crocker, a group of Sacramento merchants who had founded the Central Pacific, provided the financial and political muscle. Conquering the Sierras involved blasting tunnels through solid rock, often using newly developed and highly unstable nitroglycerin, a process that claimed many lives. They had to build massive wooden trestles across deep chasms and carve roadbeds along precipitous ledges. Snow was a tremendous obstacle, with winter snowfalls in the high Sierras often reaching depths of 30 to 40 feet, necessitating the construction of extensive snowsheds to protect the tracks. The workforce for the Central Pacific was largely composed of thousands of Chinese immigrants, recruited due to a severe shortage of local white labor willing to undertake such back-breaking and dangerous work. These Chinese workers, initially viewed with skepticism, proved to be exceptionally diligent, courageous, and skilled. They endured brutal conditions, lower pay than their white counterparts, and immense dangers, particularly in the high Sierras where they faced treacherous snowdrifts, avalanches, and the perilous task of being lowered down cliff faces in baskets to set explosive charges. Their contribution was absolutely crucial to the Central Pacific's success in overcoming the mountain barrier, though their role was often downplayed or ignored in contemporary accounts, and for many years thereafter. Both companies pushed their crews relentlessly, driven by the lucrative government subsidies that paid more for track laid in difficult terrain, and by the intense rivalry to cover more ground. The pace of construction became a national obsession, with newspapers eagerly reporting the miles of track laid each day. Surveyors scouted routes far ahead, often in hostile territory. Grading crews followed, leveling the land, creating cuts through hills and fills across gullies. Then came the track laying teams, working with an almost militaristic assembly line precision. Men would distribute the wooden ties, then others would lay down the heavy iron rails, followed by spikers who hammered them into place. It was a symphony of coordinated, strenuous labor. Supply trains constantly ferried materials, rails, ties, spikes, food, tools and equipment, to the ever-advancing end of track. It was a monumental undertaking, a vast, sprawling and often brutal enterprise that stretched across nearly 2,000 miles of diverse, frequently hostile and unforgiving territory. The ambitious dream of binding a continent with iron rails was slowly, arduously, and at great human cost, becoming a tangible reality, inching closer each day from both east and west. The race to lay track was not just a matter of engineering and labor, but also a high-stakes financial game. The Pacific Railway Act and subsequent amendments provided government bonds and vast land grants to the railroad companies for each mile of track completed. This incentivized speed, sometimes at the expense of quality or long-term planning, as each company vied to claim more land and subsidies by outbuilding the other. The Credit Mobilier of America, a construction company associated with the Union Pacific's key investors, notably Thomas C. Durant, became embroiled in a major scandal later in the decade. It was revealed that this company had overcharged the Union Pacific for construction work, with the inflated profits and shares in Credit Mobilier going to Union Pacific stockholders and influential congressmen, effectively defrauding the government and other investors. While the Central Pacific, under the tight control of its Big Four, Stanford, Huntington, Hopkins and Crocker, managed its finances with more internal discipline, it too faced immense pressures and accusations of wielding undue political influence. As the Union Pacific pushed westward across the plains of Nebraska and into Wyoming territory, the daily life of its workforce was a mixture of grueling labor, boredom, and intermittent danger. The track-laying crews, often numbering in the thousands, lived in temporary mobile camps that followed the end of track. These hell-on-wheels towns, as they were notoriously known, were often lawless and chaotic, filled with saloons, gambling dens and brothels, attracting a rough assortment of characters alongside the laborers. Irish immigrants, many of them veterans of the recent Civil War, formed the backbone of the Union Pacific's workforce. They worked long hours under harsh conditions, from the scorching summer heat that could cause sunstroke to the bitter blizzards of winter that could halt construction for weeks. The logistical challenge of supplying these armies of workers with food, water, often scarce on the plains, tools and materials across hundreds of miles of undeveloped territory was immense. Every rail, every spike, every wooden tie had to be transported from the east. Encounters with Native American tribes, whose lands were being unceremoniously bisected and whose vital buffalo herds were being disrupted and decimated by the railroad's advance and the hunters it brought, became increasingly frequent and violent. The U.S. Army was often called upon to protect surveying parties and construction crews, leading to numerous skirmishes and contributing to the broader conflicts of the Plains Wars. Tribes like the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho fiercely resisted this encroachment, seeing the Iron Horse as a symbol of the destruction of their way of life. Meanwhile, the Central Pacific faced its own monumental struggle in the Sierra Nevada. The Chinese laborers, under the direction of Charles Crocker, who oversaw construction, performed heroically under conditions that many others had deemed impossible. To conquer the granite peaks, they had to blast 15 tunnels, the longest being the Summit Tunnel at Donner Pass, nearly 1,700 feet long. Work on these tunnels was slow, arduous, and incredibly dangerous. They drilled by hand, then packed blasting powder, and later, the more powerful but far more unstable nitroglycerin into the holes. Nitroglycerin was so perilous that it was often mixed on site. Accidents were frequent, and many Chinese workers lost their lives to premature explosions, rock falls, or the extreme cold and avalanches of the high mountain winters. During the brutal winters of 1866 and 1867, snowdrifts often reached 40 feet or more, burying work sites and living quarters. Workers had to dig tunnels through the snow itself to reach the tunnel faces, or to live in snow caves. Despite these conditions, they persevered, working around the clock in shifts, their dedication and resilience being the primary reason the Central Pacific was able to overcome the mountain barrier. They were meticulous and efficient, and despite facing racial discrimination and receiving lower wages than white workers, and initially having to pay for their own food and lodging from those wages, their contribution was indispensable. In 1867, thousands of Chinese workers staged a strike, demanding better pay and shorter hours, particularly in the dangerous tunnel work, a remarkable act of organized labor that, while not immediately meeting all demands, did highlight their critical role and eventually led to some wage adjustments. Once through the Sierras and into the Nevada desert, the Central Pacific faced new challenges: extreme summer heat, scarcity of water, and the logistical difficulty of hauling every single rail, tie, and piece of equipment across the newly conquered mountains from their supply base in California. Yet, here on the flatter terrain, their pace quickened dramatically. The competition between the two companies intensified as they drew closer to each other in Utah territory. Both companies pushed their crews to extraordinary feats of track laying. Charles Crocker of the Central Pacific famously won a $10,000 bet by having his Chinese and Irish crews lay an astounding 10 miles of track in a single day in April 1869, a record that still stands. This 10 miles in a day feat was a carefully orchestrated, almost superhuman effort involving thousands of men in a precise, relentless ballet of labor. As the two lines neared their meeting point, Congress had to intervene to designate the official junction. Promontory Summit, in the Promontory Mountains north of the Great Salt Lake in Utah, was chosen. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation and national pride. On May 10, 1869, the final rails were laid, and the last spike, often called the Golden Spike Ceremony, took place. Dignitaries from both railroads, including Leland Stanford of the Central Pacific and Thomas C. Durant of the Union Pacific, were present. Several ceremonial spikes were used, including a golden one from California, a silver one from Nevada, and one of gold, silver, and iron from Arizona Territory. Telegraph wires were connected to a special ceremonial laurel tie and one of the spikes, so that the hammer blows could be transmitted to. When the final spikes were driven, though the actual final iron spike was driven by a regular worker, as the dignitaries often missed in their ceremonial swings, the telegraph message flashed across the nation: done. The completion of the first transcontinental railroad, was met with widespread celebration. It was hailed as a triumph of engineering, a symbol of national unity, especially poignant so soon after the Civil War and the realization of manifest destiny. It physically bound the nation together, from Atlantic to Pacific, in a way that had never before been possible. The journey from New York to San Francisco, which had previously taken months by wagon or ship, could now be completed in about a week. The Iron Horse had indeed conquered the continent. The celebrations that erupted across the United States upon the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad on May 10, 1869, were fervent and widespread, reflecting the profound significance of this achievement. Church bells rang, cannons fired, and parades filled the streets of cities from coast to coast. It was more than just the joining of two sets of iron rails at Promontory Summit, Utah. It was seen as the physical and symbolic unification of a nation still healing from the deep wounds of the Civil War. The Iron Horse had not only conquered vast distances and formidable geographical barriers, but had also helped to stitch together the disparate regions of a sprawling republic. The immediate impacts of the railroad were transformative. Travel time between the east and west coasts, which had previously taken months of arduous and often perilous journey by wagon train or sea voyage, was dramatically reduced to about a week. This unprecedented speed and efficiency revolutionized transportation and communication. Mail, goods, and people could now move across the continent with a reliability and swiftness previously unimaginable. The telegraph lines, which had often been constructed alongside the railroad tracks, provided near instantaneous communication, further shrinking the perceived distance between distant parts of the country. Economically, the Transcontinental Railroad was a powerful engine of growth and change. It opened up the vast interior of the American West to settlement, agriculture, and resource exploitation on an unprecedented scale. Farmers and ranchers could now more easily transport their products, grain, cattle, and other agricultural goods, to eastern markets, and conversely receive manufactured goods and supplies from the industrialized East. New towns and cities sprang up along the railroad's route, serving as transportation hubs, supply depots, and centers for local commerce. Industries such as mining for coal, silver, copper, and other minerals besides gold, timber, and tourism in the West were all profoundly stimulated by the railroad's arrival. The land grants awarded to the railroad companies also led to extensive land sales and settlement, encouraging a wave of westward migration that would continue for decades. However, the impacts were not universally positive. For Native American tribes of the Great Plains and the Intermountain West, the railroad was a catastrophe. It accelerated the destruction of their traditional way of life by bisecting their ancestral lands, disrupting the migratory patterns of the buffalo, their primary source of sustenance and cultural identity, and bringing an overwhelming influx of settlers, miners, and hunters into their territories. The US government and military often used the railroad to facilitate the subjugation of these tribes, transporting troops and supplies for campaigns against them. The Iron Horse became a powerful symbol of encroachment and the relentless advance of American expansionism, leading to increased conflict and the eventual confinement of most plains tribes to reservations. The environment also suffered significant consequences. The construction process itself, particularly in mountainous regions, involved extensive blasting and earth moving. The operation of steam locomotives required vast quantities of wood in the early days, or coal and water. The railroad also facilitated the large-scale exploitation of natural resources, leading to deforestation, overgrazing in some areas, and the near extermination of the American buffalo, driven by commercial hunting for hides, made more efficient by rail transport and by a deliberate government policy to undermine the plains tribes. Socially, the railroad contributed to the continued diversification of the American population, but also, at times, exacerbated existing tensions. While it brought people from different backgrounds together in new Western communities, it also facilitated the spread of established social hierarchies and prejudices. The Chinese laborers who had been so crucial to the construction of the Central Pacific, for example, faced continued discrimination and anti-Chinese sentiment even after their monumental contribution. Many were driven out of railroad work or other industries by racist laws and mob violence in the years that followed. The financing and construction of the railroad also left a mixed legacy. While it was a triumph of engineering and a catalyst for economic growth, it was also plagued by financial scandals, most notably the Credit Mobilier affair, which exposed widespread corruption involving railroad financiers and prominent politicians. The immense power wielded by the railroad monopolies in the West also became a source of resentment for farmers and small business owners, leading to populist movements and calls for government regulation of railroad rates and practices in the later 19th century. Despite these complex and often troubling consequences, the completion of the first transcontinental railroad is undeniably a pivotal moment in American history. It accelerated the settlement and economic development of the American West, physically united a continent-spanning nation, and became a powerful symbol of American ingenuity, ambition, and the ethos of manifest destiny. It ushered in a new era of industrialization and interconnectedness, fundamentally altering the economic, social, and political landscape of the United States. The wedding of the rails at Promontory Summit was not just the end of a construction project, it was the beginning of a new chapter in the nation's story, one that would see the United States emerge as a major industrial and global power. The iron rails laid across prairies, deserts, and mountains were, in essence, the sinews of a rapidly modernizing nation.